Well, g'day there. My name's Glenn and I'm a dentist, and as well as dentist, I'm also a lay pastor at a small church in Byron Bay, New South Wales, Australia. 2020 is going to be remembered, I think, as the year dominated by the fallout of a global pandemic. At only 120 nanometres, this tiny bundle of RNA has had a greater impact on the world stage than the greatest of all superpowers. In this time of unprecedented global upheaval, it doesn't take long for conspiracists to emerge with explanations and reasons they find make sense. One former Australian politician publicly stated that she believed the coronavirus was a biological weapon designed to address, amongst other things, a power imbalance between the US and China. The internet propagates conspiracy and fake news, and if you are bored, you will find websites blaming Brexit, Russia, fundamentalists, Big Pharma, and even the Rothschilds for this pandemic. When Jesus was on earth some 2,000 years ago, he came across a man who had been born blind. Even then, questions around causation and accountability prevailed. Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? As creatures with agency, we believe that if we can understand it, we can avoid it. I've noticed as a medical professional that we often confuse description with prescription. But describing a problem is not the same as prescribing a cure. We might feel a little safer if we can place a label on a problem, but an accurate description does not always inevitably guarantee a good cure. We spend a disproportionate amount of money in the health sector on diagnoses that often don't translate into better health outcomes. But patients want labels. And they think that if they have a label, if they have a description, if they have a diagnosis, then somehow they have regained control. If they know what they're dealing with, they feel much more capable that they can be involved in accessing a solution. And control and power are important to us as human beings. When something like COVID-19 appears, we want to know more. We want to describe it, we want to understand it. And our appetite right now for information is insatiable. We want to know who has the disease so we can protect ourselves from catching it. We want to know exactly when toilet rolls will be placed on our supermarket shelves so that we can strategically place ourselves to gain access to them and gain advantage over those who are less well informed. We want to know when a vaccination will be ready for distribution so that we can be more strategic in drawing down on our savings and planning our financial futures. Knowledge allows agency, and agency protects power. In times of crisis, we can often construct biased narratives that inevitably shift the responsibility away from us. As a husband, I'm happy to own the responsibility of opening all of the tight olive jars in our house. I've learned that if I take a sharp implement and puncture a small hole in the lid, I release all of the vacuum seal, and it makes the opening of the olive jar simple and easy. I'm the man. But if my wife asks me to fix slow internet or a lack of mobile reception, then I'm inclined to make some rather disparaging remarks of our telecommunications provider. I'm happy to own the responsibility for problems I can solve, but the greater the problem and the more difficult the solution, the more likely it is that I want to shift responsibility away from myself. The result of this is that I can feel in control of problems that I solve, but shift responsibility for problems that are too big for me. When I feel in control, I mitigate my own feelings of vulnerability. Right back in the story of our beginning in the book of Genesis, the pandemic of evil was released on this world. The world in an instant went from being, as the book of Genesis describes it, as very good to being not so good. God, who had created our first parents to enjoy freedom and fearlessness, finds the first couple cowering and hiding in the bushes. Originally invested with dominion, creativity and freedom, he finds them vulnerable and exposed. And God, who is introduced in the Bible to us as a relational being, immediately addresses the core of all crises. Where are you? What is your address? What is that location that makes you realise you belong? Where is it that you feel at home? Evil at its core is fundamentally about dispossession. It removes us from where we belong. It may not necessarily make us geographical refugees, but we can be dispossessed in our own home and in our own skin when we feel threatened by real or even perceived danger. Our first parents were persuaded by the deceiver to shift loyalties, and in so doing, there was a relocation of their identity and their address. God knows that they are hiding, and he knows exactly where they are. He doesn't ask Adam, "Where are you?" in order that he might find out, but rather to give Adam and Eve an opportunity to describe to him and to themselves where they have ended up. When we are frightened, when we feel vulnerable, we hide, we withdraw, we perceive others as a threat. The thin veneer of civility is easily fractured in times of crisis. We can turn on our neighbours, on our friends, on those in positions of power, and on those who have no power. We can become introspective and isolated. Anxiety breeds suspicion, and suspicion is the predecessor of all relational violation. So God asks another important question. Who is defining reality for you? Who is your source of knowledge? Who is helping you assemble your worldview? A rich man in the not-too-distant past was defined by physical resources, land, cattle, territory. Wars were fought over geographical boundaries and borders. But in our day and age, the war we fight is over the control of information and knowledge. The world's most powerful people are those who deal in information. We have, in some sense, in this modern age, commodified knowledge. The person who patents the coronavirus immunisation will probably join Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates as the beneficiaries of an idea. And in the continuance of the story of our beginnings, it is a natural progression of investigation. Where we are is inextricably linked to who we listen to. There are false Christs everywhere, disseminating truth mixed with half-truth and in some case outright error. The human condition is such that all of us are capable of deceiving and being deceived. We all have a filter through which we process information and through which knowledge is strained. And should we choose to trust the wrong source, we will end up with a compromised story. In Adam's case, he knew intuitively that he was naked because he had taken advice from an unreliable source. Adam and Eve had accepted a different version of the truth, one told to them by a deceiver. And in listening to the deceiver, they had disregarded the directive of their Creator. When questioned about their breach of trust, we see how quickly they start blaming someone and something other than themselves. The man said the woman said the serpent. Descriptively, the man and the woman are correct. They are not telling untruths. But while they may be describing the situation accurately, they are both involved in blame shifting. They are both abrogating responsibility. They are making the crisis someone else's problem. And why? Because at the end of the day, they don't have the capacity to solve the problem. Which brings me back to the original question we are looking at. We always want to know who to blame. It makes us feel better about ourselves if we can be clear about our own responsibility. If I can make the unsolvable problems in my story someone else's problem, then I am absolved of the responsibility to address them. Jesus' response to the question of who sinned is rather strange. Jesus refuses to be drawn into arguments about the origin and existence of evil. The existence of evil is somewhat mysterious, and usually in our clumsy attempts to explain it, we inevitably end up defending it. None of us doubt that evil exists. The reality of the coronavirus responsible for COVID-19 is all too convincing. But if we take our lead from Jesus, we will not be so consumed with answering the origins of this virus, but rather seeking to deal with what we have and contributing to the solution. In some sense, we could say that we will not be consumed with answering the cause, but rather causing the answer. When we become reductionist in our thinking and we want to make complex things incredibly simple, we usually end up making a mess. We often want simple options. We want to ask the questions, was it this man or his parents? Is it me or you? Is it us or them? This binary thinking is almost always divisive. It ultimately leads us to do what only God can do, and that is to truly separate those who are in from those who are out. Jesus sees the problem of evil as a problem to be addressed more than a problem to be described. And my challenge to those of you who resonate with his character is in this moment of time to look for opportunities not to talk, but to work. In this present crisis, we need to resist attributing blame, to resist erecting walls of division and separation, and instead, like Jesus, to participate to the best of our ability and resources in providing solutions to the current problem. The problem of evil is ubiquitous and all pervasive. The coronavirus of 2019-20 is not someone else's problem. It's everyone's problem. And blaming others achieves little. In our next episode, we will look at God's response to our default position of blame shifting. I hope you will join me then.